Belzoni, Mississippi, a small town nestled deep in the Delta, known as the catfish capital of the world. On the surface, it seemed peaceful, but for Black residents in the 1950s, Belzoni was anything but. Life here was shaped by the brutal realities of Jim Crow, a world where standing up for your rights could cost you everything, and for one man, it did. Reverend George Lee was more than just a preacher. He was a pioneer, the first Black person to register to vote in Humphreys County, in a place where voter suppression was not just common, it was law. But Reverend Lee didn't stop there. He urged others to register too, telling them their voice mattered, even when the threats began to pour in. Local white leaders demanded he remove his name from the voter rolls. They warned him. They threatened him, but Reverend Lee refused. His bravery inspired many, but it also put a target on his back. May 7th, 1955. It was late at night when Reverend Lee drove through the Black section of Belzoni in his Buick sedan. Suddenly, another car pulled up beside him. Witnesses said a man raised a shotgun. A blast rang out, tearing through the left side of Reverend Lee's face and jaw. His car swerved, crashed into a nearby house. But by the time he arrived at the hospital, Reverend George Lee was gone. A courageous life cut short what should have been a murder investigation, quickly turned into a cover-up. The sheriff outright dismissed the idea of foul play. He claimed the shotgun pellets in Reverend Lee's face were nothing more than fragments of dental fillings. Yes, dental fillings. An absurd and insulting lie. Local newspapers went along with it. They called the murder a freak accident, suggesting Reverend Lee simply lost control of his car. And the effort to bury the truth didn't stop there. When Reverend Lee's allies tried to spread the word, they hit another roadblock. Local telephone operators flat out refused to connect long-distance calls for Black residents. Desperate to share what had happened, activists were forced to drive to Jackson or Mountain Bayou just to get the news out. Meanwhile, Black-owned businesses in town faced economic retaliation. Grocers like Gus Courts, another voting rights activist, saw wholesalers cut off their supplies entirely. The message was clear: if you fight for your rights, you'll pay the price. 3 Black doctors who examined Reverend Lee's body all agreed. There was clear evidence of a shotgun wound, shotgun pellets and powder burns, and his injuries were not the result of an accident. Initially, there were witnesses, people who described the 3 men in the car that pulled up beside Reverend Lee. But fear quickly took hold. Witnesses began to recant their stories or disappear altogether. One school teacher who claimed to have seen the shooting suddenly left town and was never heard from again. Speaking out in Belzoni wasn't just risky, it was deadly. Despite the lies, despite the fear, the truth of Reverend George Lee's murder could not be silenced. Over 2,000 mourners gathered for his funeral at Green Grove Baptist Church. Many stood outside, unable to fit into the packed building. Civil rights leaders like Dr. T.R.M. Howard took up the fight, calling on national leaders to intervene. Congressman Charles Diggs brought the case to Washington, and though no one was ever convicted for Reverend Lee's murder, his death became a rallying cry for the civil rights movement. Belzoni, a small town that holds a big piece of America's history. Reverend George Lee's bravery reminds us that the fight for justice is never easy, but it's always necessary. His life was a testament to the power of courage, and his death a reminder of the price of freedom.